Hello and welcome to Brand X Reviews. Welcome to this 5th anniversary edition. For the 5th anniversary of this channel, today the 9th of October 2018, I wanted to talk about something that's quite special to me. And it's not something that I've really spoken about on this channel in any kind of dedicated sense. And that is the Rocky franchise. I think it's kind of fitting really because we actually have a Rocky film coming out the end of next month pretty much. Now technically I suppose you could say it's not a Rocky film, it's a Creed film. It's a Rocky film, it's part of the franchise, whatever the name is. Now, I've liked all the previous entries, even number 5. I realise that puts me in the minority, but I think it's got its place anyway. I would agree with most people, it's got its place as being probably the least favourite of mine and everyone else's, but to me, this franchise has never really done much wrong. So I'm going to talk about the films. I'm going to talk about kind of some of the things I'm thinking about Creed 2, which is out a little over a month's time. So where do I begin? Well, I think everybody that has liked this franchise, depending on how old you are, I guess, has got early memories of watching these films as a kid. I think the first time I saw any of these films, I wasn't that young, to be honest. I think a lot of people had seen it when they were like 8, 9, 10, because it's pretty much something that young kids can watch. It's not something that's particularly violent, it's just boxing, I guess. But I was about 13, I think, when I first saw a Rocky film. And I seem to remember I was around at a friend's house, and it was on a Friday night. I think it was number 2 and 3. And this was back in the mid-90s, so it was actually kind of difficult getting hold of these films because I kind of took an instant liking to these movies. And I already liked Stallone from certain other films that I'd seen him in at the time. As a young kid in the mid-90s, I guess you've got a good decade and a half there, well, maybe even 2 decades worth of Stallone's movies, which is just pure gold for kids of that age, I guess. And yeah, like I say, it was very difficult getting hold of these films back then. I seem to remember, obviously, tapes were the format back in the day, and it was difficult just tracking them down. You had to go into certain shops and order them. We didn't really have Amazon like we do nowadays, and you'd be paying quite a lot of money for these things. So I seem to remember, I think it was the summer of '95, a friend and I were trying to get hold of these things. And I remember the DVD sets came out a few years later. I think it was 2001-ish when they came out in the UK. And since then they've been re-released again and again, different editions, a couple of different formats as well. I won't really get into that. But yeah, basically the film franchise, let's just kind of go over that. Now obviously there are 7 of these films, soon to be 8, with there's the original 5 Rocky films which spanned from 1976, I believe, up till 1990. And for the longest time, that was the franchise. It was a kind of contained and limited to that. But in 2006, they did a 6th film. It wasn't called Rocky 6, it was just called Rocky Balboa. And to me, it makes it's a solid entry in the series. And I thought that you can't follow it up after that. And then I heard a few years ago they were doing a Creed film, and I thought it's kind of risky. That could so easily go south. And obviously, I knew that Stallone wasn't writing or directing the thing, so I was a bit skeptical. But the film came out and it just blew me away. I thought it was the best film of that year, to be honest, or at least it was up there anyway. It was really powerful story. It was quite inspiring as well in a lot of ways, and kind of tied back into the film Rocky 4 as well, which I'll get into. But it was just something that you never expected, and I don't think anyone even asked for it, but it was so good. But I'll get into that as well later on. So chronologically anyway, the first Rocky film. Came out in 1976, and I think it's quite an important story, just the behind the scenes story with this, because Stallone really struggled to get this film made and financed and so on. And even when it was being made, granted he wasn't directing the film, but he struggled getting certain scenes just to get them to be filmed. The one scene where he's in bed with Adrian just before he has the big fight at the end, it's a key scene. Without this scene, the film doesn't really work.
Nobody's ever gone the distance for Creed. And if I can go that distance, seeing that bell rings and I'm still standing, I weren't just another bum from the neighborhood.
You have to explain where he's coming from. The point that he's not supposed to win the fight. He's supposed to go the distance at the very least. If he can just go the distance, he will prove that he's not just a bum, that he's not just some other guy kind of thing, that he, that's his redemption. And without that scene, it didn't really work. You needed it to be kind of explained. So he really fought to have that filmed, and the people that were making the film didn't want to allow that to take place for whatever reasons, time constraints, budgetary reasons. But he held his ground and he managed to get it in there. And there's a few other things as well, issues with him actually being the star of the film as well. Again, that was something that he jeopardised the entire film getting made. He insisted on that. He stuck to his guns, and evidently it was the right thing to do. So the actual backstory to this film is as inspiring as the film itself in a lot of ways. So that's Rocky 1 anyway. The second film...
You're going down, man. You're going down.
The most electrifying rematch in motion picture history. Rocky 2, starring Sylvester Stallone.
I tend to find the second film... One of the few criticisms I've got about this franchise, I would probably just say about the second film, is it does kind of drag a little bit towards the middle when Adrian is in a coma. It kind of needs to, don't get me wrong, but it still drags a little bit. But beyond that, it's a great film. I would say that the second film kind of is the only one that really goes with the first one. They kind of get a bit further and further away from each other, to the point where when you get to like numbers 4 and 5, you're kind of thinking, this doesn't have the same kind of tone as the first one. But that's kind of the nature of it, I guess. I guess life can be that way as well. Who feels they're in the same place, in the same mindset that they were 10, 15 years ago? I certainly don't. So if you were to make a movie of my life, the tone of the film now compared to where the tone of that 15 years ago would be very different. So I guess you can kind of relate to it in that way. That's the way I put it. So 1 and 2 tend to go together quite naturally. Now, obviously, the second one, like the first one, he's fighting Apollo Creed in this, and it's kind of interesting because I guess he's supposed to be the antagonist of the film, is Apollo Creed, but he's not really. He's a good guy. You can totally relate to him. He's not even set up as a villain or anything like that as such. Those kind of characters came later in the franchise. But Carl Weathers, who played Apollo Creed, was just really good in this, and obviously where they go with his character through the film franchise, it's kind of built on what they established in the first 2 movies. So really solid character with Apollo Creed as well. And that's the second film. I think that was the first film I actually saw in the franchise. Like I say, going back to what I was saying before, it's not like it is now where you can just buy films easily. So Rocky 3, this was kind of the first film that really feels like an action movie.
Against his most devastating and dangerous opponent.
I'll bust you out. Go for it.
It's got a lot of those kind of tropes, the kind of movies like The Dark Knight Rises, for example. That's a parallel that's been kind of thrown out there a number of times, and also the Black Panther movie, the Marvel movie Black Panther that came out earlier this year, has got that kind of theme of, good guy, he's doing all right for himself, then he gets kind of taken out and knocked out by somebody who's very evil. And then he has to build himself up and then have a rematch with him at the end of the film, and he wins. That's pretty much Rocky 3. I'm sure it was done in films before this, but usually when you see that kind of thing happen in a film, like I say, Dark Knight Rises, Black Panther, you kind of think back to Rocky 3, because I think that was one film that did it quite iconically. And obviously Mr. T was so good in this as well. I think this was his first film as well. From memory, I seem to remember it saying introducing Mr. T, and he played Clubber Lang. And he was a real arsehole as well. You really wanted to see him get knocked out, unlike Apollo Creed that you saw before. Now, one of the things that I love about this film is the way that it flips things with Apollo Creed. In the first 2 movies, Rocky was against him, he was opposed to him, obviously. Whereas in this film, their friendship solidifies, and he goes from training to beat Apollo Creed to being trained by Apollo Creed. It's this really good dynamic that you get in this. You don't usually get those kind of things flipping in a film franchise from sequel to sequel, but it's great when you do, because it's just like another way of looking at a character. Instead of seeing him as an opponent, you're now seeing him as an ally. So it's really good as that. So that's Rocky 3 anyway. Rocky 4 is probably the one that gets the piss taken out of it the most, but it's still a great film, and a lot of people that do the piss taking will also admit that as well. I'm one of them.
I must break you.
Rocky 4.
It's very cheesy, it's full of montages. I think at least 30 minutes of this film is just montages, but it's all good stuff. It was 1985 when this came out. It was banging the sort of early years of MTV, music videos, that kind of stuff, and you get a bit of that in this, but it's all good. Now, one thing I will say about this is it's kind of similar to the film that came before with Rocky 3, where obviously something bad happens, there's a bad guy, and then you have to kind of train up and then defeat the bad guy. Obviously, it's done with a different kind of dynamic with this. Apollo Creed gets killed in this. It's a really sad scene as well. No matter how many times you see it, you always kind of feel the loss in this. It's done really well in a cheesy sort of 1980s action hero kind of way. But yeah, Dolph Lundgren, this was his first major movie role. I think he had like cameos in films like View to a Kill before this, but he was pretty much an unknown at the time. And he was a very good antagonist in this film. I think he was the only person that we've had in one of these films where it's felt like actual revenge has to be levied against this person. I think with Clubber Lang, it was more in Rocky 3, it was more a case of you just need to beat this guy to get your title back to win that title, whereas in this one it's avenging the death of a friend, so it feels a bit more like a traditional action film, just kind of played out through boxing. But it's done really well, and it's got its place in my heart, does this film. And I think it's really good, obviously, with the Creed movies kind of tying specifically with this film, especially Creed 2 that's coming out. I hope they don't mess it up, because it's kind of, this lays the foundation for that movie, potentially. So that's Rocky 4 anyway. Now Rocky 5 tends to be the one that people like the least. This one, I think they just really wanted to kind of ground the Rocky character and take him back to what everybody kind of fell in love with in those first two movies.
In the ring, Tommy Gunn only fights in the ring.
My ring's outside.
Yeah, let's do it.
Come on, Tommy, knock me out.
So what they do is they basically say that Rocky's lost all of his money. He has to kind of go back to his humble financial beginnings at the very least, and he's also got brain damage as well, so that kind of like slow character that you had in the first film, who seems to have become a lot fitter and more intelligent in the later films like Rocky 3 and 4, they kind of taken him back a peg or two, and he's pretty much the character that he was in the first film. Now again, there's no actual boxing in this one as such when it comes to seeing Rocky fighting. Obviously, there's a street fight at the end. From what I understand, there was some idea that Rocky should die at the end of the film, but obviously they didn't go with that. It'd have been a bit of a somber ending for the franchise. But in this one, he has a protege by the name of Tommy Gunn, played by the late Tommy Morrison, who's pretty good in this film, to be honest. And he was an actual boxer. And there's sort of betrayal aspect to it, all that kind of thing, and dealing with the dark side of the boxing industry. It's all kind of in this. So I like this film, to be honest. Like I say, I understand it's not the best of the films. It's probably my least favourite of the films, but it's a high standard. So, and that was the last of the movies, like I say, for the longest time, till in 2006 they brought the thing back. And Rocky Balboa, a lot of people were saying, would we really need another Rocky film? How's this going to work? He's way too old. That was kind of the point of the film. He had to kind of redeem himself as a character, but also Stallone redeemed himself, I think, as a filmmaker.
Nothing over till it's over.
Where's that from? The 80s?
That's probably the 70s.
directed this, he wrote it, and obviously starred in it as well. And the film did very well critically and financially. If it hadn't been for this movie and the success of this movie, we wouldn't have had the Rambo movie come straight after. We wouldn't have had the Expendables franchise, and Stallone's in a few other films as well. Some of them have been pretty good. I've liked some of them. Some maybe not so good, but it's been good to see him have a comeback anyway in the last sort of 10 or so years, and it's all because of the success of this movie. And obviously in this one he's aging quite a bit as well, so there's a little bit of background there in terms of getting old and feeling that you don't have anything else. You'll never be able to prove yourself again, maybe to reassess that, because obviously that's kind of where that's the message of this film in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways it's kind of a remake of the first film as well. But if you haven't seen this, if you've never got around to watching this, I'm realising this is a bit more of a recent one, so you might not have seen it. Give it a watch, it's definitely good. And as with Rocky 5, I thought that was the end of the franchise for quite a long time. I thought, well, they're never going to be able to follow this up. Well, I was wrong. Creed, very good film, obviously deals with Apollo Creed's illegitimate son, Adonis.
How do you know all this?
I'm his son.
And he's played by Michael B. Jordan. Really good actor. I've seen him in a number of things, and he was absolutely ideal for this as well. And this one came out, and I didn't know what to make of it at first, but when it eventually got released, I think it was a few months behind in the UK, so it was like early 2016. But it came out, let's call it a 2015 film, because that's when it came out for argument's sake. I would say it was the best film that year. And some of the boxing sequences in this are really good. They kind of go all in one steady take. Obviously it's done with clever film editing methods and so on and so forth, but it plays out as one continuous fight that he has kind of in the middle of the film. And Tony Bellew, did I pronounce his name right? Plays the bad guy in this. I say bad guy, the opponent in this. He's a bit of a dick, but he gives him a chance, and at the end of it, he's fairly gentlemanly about it. So again, I think the only real villains in this franchise were the Dolph Lundgren character, but the others were either kind of balanced between just being competitive sportsmen and just douchebags. But the conflict between the two characters is plays out quite well on screen anyway. You kind of get the sense that these two have a pretty fundamental disliking of each other, but realise they got to do this. So so these are the films as they are now. Like I say, there's been various different formats for these movies. Obviously, I remember going back to the day where we had them on tape. Then there was a DVD box set. If you want to get these, if you don't currently own them, I'd recommend you get this set. This has all of the extra features that were included on the previous releases, such as the DVDs, so you're not kind of losing anything there. And I've heard mixed things be said about the quality of these films, but I think the original Rocky film, the quality of that on Blu-ray was quite a surprise. I didn't know that film could look so nice, with it being quite a low budget and quite an old film, but I think they did a pretty good job with the Blu-ray. And you can get Creed in 4K as well, so I'd give that a watch if you can get it on that format anyway, obviously, because quality's better. So it's nice to have the definitive versions of these. I don't know if they're going to re-release the Rocky films on 4K at any point, at least in the UK. I don't know if they're available anywhere else in the world, but on that format anyway, but we'll see. Now, speaking of 4K and Stallone, we have the Rambo films coming out, well, the original trilogy coming out in 4K. I think it's in sort of mid-November time. I've pre-ordered those, so I'll probably do a review of those at some point. I've spoken many times about the Rambo franchise as well, so again, that's something to look at. But I'll pretty much leave it there anyway. That's the Rocky films. What are your thoughts? Leave a comment. Now, finally, today is the 5th anniversary of Brand X Reviews, and I thought I'd do a special video for this. Now, Topher has sent us something in. Again, he sent us his birthday pants to say happy birthday to Brand X Reviews. So, yeah, they're not looking too good. I hope he washed these buggers before he sent them in. That's all I can say there. But yeah, this channel started 5 years ago today, and it wasn't something I intended to do in the long run, and it's not something that I've really put a lot of effort into promoting. I just kind of put videos out there for the sake of them, and sometimes people watch them, sometimes people don't. But it all started with a review of, I don't know if you can see just above where my finger is here, this box set here on my shelf. That was the Dark Knight Trilogy box set that I was doing a review of on the 9th of October 2013. Just to kind of show my mates on Facebook, because a few people were asking about it, and it arrived in the post, I videoed it, I said this is all the stuff you get with it. And then some people said, oh, do a few more of these videos. And then before I knew it, I had a video with like a channel with 50 videos on it. So there you go. So anyway, like I say, obviously we've got a YouTube channel, we've got a Facebook page as well, and Instagram, which I don't really use too much. I got rid of Twitter recently because I'm not a big fan of Twitter. Some of the freedom of speech issues they've got on there and censorship and so on and so forth. I realise it's a private platform, whatever, but it's not for me anyway. Not for Brand X Reviews. So yeah, you can follow us, but for now I'll just say to all the people that have supported the channel and sent in mailbag requests, all 2 of you, thanks for the support, guys, and there'll be plenty more videos to come in the near future, and I'll just say thank you very much for watching.
What?